this session titled Winter is Coming for Microservice Complexity. So you're probably wondering, why are we saying winter is coming? Well, besides our excitement for the return of Game of Thrones, we at CA are embracing Docker across many areas of our business. And we're finding ourselves facing challenges with these new paradigms, and we know we aren't alone. We're early in the hype cycle around Docker and containerization, and as adoption becomes more widespread, we think these challenges are going to mutate and multiply. We see parallels with previous technologies such as WSDL, J2EE, or even the cloud. Today we're going to talk about some of those challenges that we experience, and we're going to talk about some of the creative solutions that we've developed at CA Technologies to help us as these storms approach. So today, you're going to have three speakers. Myself, Mark, who's a founder of a product called Yippee.io, Encore, who's a founder of a product called CubeShip.io, and Nishant, who's a product manager in the application performance management product at CA. So Yippee.io and CubeShip are both accelerator programs in the CA Accelerator, which means basically we're startups within a large enterprise that is CA Technologies. So there's a chill in the air, right? And do you find yourself facing power struggles like Jon Snow does? Maybe struggles between monolith, microservice, and even serverless architectures? How about between dev and ops, features and technical debt? Would better collaboration and communication have helped Rob Stark, right? So what's the most time you've wasted on out-of-date documentation or out-of-date architecture? How many communication channels do you guys use at your companies? Did Khal Drogo choose the wrong battle to fight? How often have you chosen a specific technology, tool, language, framework, or whatever, only to find out that you needed to reverse direction afterwards, or maybe even support multiples at the same time? Well, we think the battle lines are being drawn. So in Game of Thrones, the White Walkers keep coming back to haunt some of the characters. How often have you thought you fixed something only to find it rearing its ugly head again? We've seen this in the countless continuous integration and continuous delivery systems that we've put together, and a lot of times we're just trying to mimic what are the best practices in the industry. So there must be a better way to put these White Walkers to rest. So the good news is victory is within our reach, right? Assuming we can find our way. So some characters in Game of Thrones appear lost in haunted forests, kind of like this one. They're not sure how they got there or what path is going to lead them out. And sometimes our microservice Docker applications become lost and we're not sure what happened or how we get them back to functional, right? So we need our own Bran, who with his insightful visions of the past, present, and future can help us out. Is it possible to watch an entire forest for approaching enemies? So speaking of power struggles, here is a compose file, the YAML file, for a simple application that's modeled after Game of Thrones here. And it poses some of the challenges that we've seen with our teams as we're working with Docker. So it's a fairly complex YAML file, but the application isn't that complex. You can see that there's settings that are very specific to compose here that may not translate into other orchestration environments. You see things like lists, of course, tabs or spaces, right? We know what it should be. What about the quoted things? Should I be quoting these integers in here? Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? It's fairly complex when you have to edit it. So that's one level of complexity, but now this is Compose version 3, and it's added some new keys and semantics inside of it that you have to understand if you're going to edit these files directly, right? So most notably, like deploy is in here and health check is in here. So let's complicate it again, throw in Kubernetes. This here is a Kubernetes file, it's the same one. I've collapsed it all into a single file instead of separate ones just for illustration purposes, but you can see there's lots of keys, lots of semantics in here that I either have to know or I gotta hire somebody that does know. Okay, let's just complicate it yet again and let's throw OpenShift on top of it. So OpenShift looks a lot like Kubernetes, but guess what? It's not exactly the same. There's different keys in there. So that's where we came up with Yippee.io. So Yippee.io is targeted at those challenges that I just talked about. So editing complex YAML files and trying to support multiple orchestration environments. So we've talked to lots of people that dev wants to use one thing, whatever's easiest for dev, and ops wants to use whatever's easiest for them to secure and have repeatable processes, right? So that's where we came in with Yippee.io. Along with education is a big proponent of it. So if we were all to have a conversation about this application here, we actually could, right? In this living architecture document that is Yippee.io, I can point to this object and say, well, this one here is our Winterfell object, right? And it's our web app, and it communicates with our backend process called King's Landing. Easy for us to talk about, and it's a living document here. Now, if I look down here, Winterfell, here are all the properties, attributes, things like that I need to capture about Winterfell. So I'm not figuring out how to quote strings or how to properly create lists or nested objects in here. Yippee.io is doing that for me. So I don't have that complexity there. Now, if we wanted to talk about networks, so the compose file we saw earlier had a single network at the top. Here we see very clearly there's two networks actually in this model. The default public one, and it has four containers on it, and it has 4 containers on an internal private network. This happens to be my database server. Well, I can alias it here, MySQL, because I happen to know some of my components are actually looking for something called MySQL. If I look at volumes, again, we simplified that down to where you see the volume disk down here, which happens to be tied to MySQL, so I can have some persistent storage. And then finally, I'm an engineer, so I kind of want to see what's happening underneath the covers. So for people like myself, and probably most of you, we created something called nerd mode. So I take a look here, and this is the compose version of the application you see on the left here. One of the things that you won't see in compose, at least v2, is deploy health check attributes, right? Well, if I go to Compose 3, and by the way, as I click on these tabs, I'm generating that file dynamically from the model that's on the left. So this is Compose v3. You can see that King's Landing now has deploy and health check characteristics in it. OpenShift, guess what? We just translated that thing as well. So by modeling it once in Yippee.io, in the living architecture, you're able to then translate it into the multiple environments. Now, if I were a developer, I'd come in, I'd fork this model, and this would give me a copy of it that I could do my development with as a developer. So I happen to be a web app developer, so I'm going to come in and choose this web app called Winterfell, and I'm going to make some changes to it. But what's key here that Yippee.io enables is that I want the developers to run all of these components on their box, right? The production ones that we built in our continuous integration process. So I don't have the excuses of it worked on my machine and it doesn't work anymore in production. So we run them all here. I would come in as a developer, I would mark this component as under development or even local to say it's on my machine, don't create it in the model. Then when I download and try and run the model, it'll leave that out, allows me to connect with Eclipse to a locally running Tomcat server, set breakpoints, do that sort of thing. When I'm done, now I have to build that service, right? And I need to get it built. So at this point, we're gonna hand it over to Ankur, who's gonna talk about how do we take this Winterfell component that I would be editing here and get it into production.
Thank you very much, Mark. And guys, before I start, how many people actually follow Game of Thrones? Okay, and for rest of you who don't, basically White Walkers have been set up as a White Walker. White Walkers are the zombies. And one thing to know about zombie movies is that before everybody figures out how to get rid of them, most of the people are dead. Maybe one guy will make it, but barely. And that's what we think will happen in White Walkers and Game of Thrones. But moving on, we found the same problem with CI/CD, and the problem was that most of our team, when we looked back and saw what they were working on, they were almost always working on workflows, or they were tweaking Jenkins. It was always the case. Now, it's a great tool. We love it. But when I turned back and said, guys, is this the best workflow that money can buy? The answer was no. There's probably something that Netflix has already shared with the world, and if we can just use that, that will be so much better. But the problem is, how do you reuse these workflows? So we stepped out, we started talking to people, came across a guy who worked in a bank, and he said, look, I'm a small bank in California. I still have to follow the same regulations as JPMC and Wells Fargo and Bank of America. If I could use their CI/CD process, I'm set. Like, it's so much easier. But how do I do that? Because I spend all my time tweaking the workflows of the tool chains. So that was it. That's how we came up with CubeshipIO, and basically our goal was to come up with workflows that you can replace like that. So there are two things I want to do. First, I want to have access to all the industry standard best practices workflows that exist in this world, and there do exist those workflows. Number two, I want to run them without having to worry about how to recode Jenkins pipelines. Don't want to do that. That's what I'm going to show you. So let me switch my terminal. And then there's only one thing. So there is an app kubeship that we have built. All I'm going to do is Mark basically created a new service. There is now a repo in Git with that service, right? So what I have done is I've copied that repo on my computer. That's the only thing I've done. That's called Winterfell. Now I'm going to link kubeship app with that particular repo. So I want to tell that repo that from here onward, every time something commit happens to this repo, you start building it, okay? So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna create a project. Once the project is created, we will go and look at our repo again. We will see some changes, and those changes are going to be that we will see specific files that will drive that opinion or workflow. So just give me 1 second. It's still running. Created, configured. This is my repo. There are two files that I start seeing. One is called cube.yaml, one is called opinion. Cube.yaml tells me that CI/CD will be triggered with every commit. Opinion tells me that this is the workflow that I found default that I'm going to use to deliver this particular project. I don't like it because I went Hollywood. I got discovered, but that's besides the point. There is something else that Mark built. It was winter is coming. This is the opinion or the workflow that I want to use for my CI/CD. All I will do is grab this, drag it out. I will get rid of the old opinion that I had. If only text editors were simple. Okay, so let me just get rid of this, and I will rename this to opinion.yaml. Okay, from here on, what I'm saying is every time that there is a commit, do a CI/CD, but do it with this winter is coming opinion that I just said. So now my workflow is completely different than before. I'll go to my Git now. We all know how Git works. There are a couple of uncommitted changes because I added 2 new files to it. Let me do my commit to that, okay? And now kubeship has started building, and then it will basically take the CI/CD workflow all the way to completion and deploy it. So once it's done, because I'm sure nobody wants to wait for all this to happen, I did a pre-build before coming in. I've done it multiple times. If you come over, we can show you live. But basically, this is the workflow that was used. I can change this, and that change is as simple as me going back, opening this opinion.yaml file, and just making a change. So I can take in or put in a new stage, or maybe I want to take out a stage. I don't want to deploy to QA, let's say, for a moment. I just want to go rogue and just deploy to production. So this is all I have to do. Now, next time when this workflow runs, it's going to run with this. It's going to run with this update. That's how simple it should be. Once this workflow is completed, it looks something like this. Now that's okay, that's interesting. But real interesting part is this. kubeship gave me metrics that say that your container is now secure, it's performing well, it's scalable, and your application too. We ran it against 45, says that application is secure, and so on and so forth. So I have these metrics. I can actually take them to someone else and say that this application is now ready to be deployed. So we are announcing a beta. We have a booth, of course. Come by, bring your Git repos. Let's have some fun. Let's see if we can do CI/CD for you on the spot. We are going to do 2 workshops, one at 10:30 and one at 2 o'clock. So if you're at Expo Hall, we can take you live through this with your own repos. And with that, I'll pass it on to Nishant. Thank you.
All right. So thank you, guys. Continuing with the Game of Thrones theme, right? So we are now at the haunted forest, right? So you're in the forest, and in Game of Thrones, the haunted forest is like miles and miles long. It's on the other side of the wall, right? And our environments, the microservices environment that we work with, right, feel like a forest, right? So your apps deployed, and microservices apps have thousands of components. And if that wasn't enough, now you have Docker orchestration platforms to deal with, right? So you have containers going up and down, right? So how do you monitor in that kind of a complexity, right? It's easy to feel you're lost, right? It's easy to be reactive. So let's take a look at, how we'll start with APM. So, these environments are extremely complex, right? So how do you first even organize your applications, right? So this is the main view of APM, right? This we call as an experience view. So as you land into this view, it gives you a view of all the different applications. This could be microservices. You can group them by, Docker images, Docker container apps, Docker container services, right? And this will give you, at a snapshot, what is the performance of these different apps, right? So there's also a health score. This is essentially computed by the impact on the end user experience, right? Now, as I drill down into this, so I'm taking the same component, Winterfell, right, that we just saw. We went through we modeled it, we checked it in, and we took it through the CI/CD pipeline, right? I'm taking the same app, and as I drill down into it, now I can see that there is a problem that was identified by APM. Now, what is the problem, right? Now, back, again using the same haunted forest, do you care about a lone tree, right, falling in the forest, or are you looking for an enemy that's approaching through the forest, right? You're looking for the latter, right? Not isolated a lone tree that's fallen in the forest. But our environments are like that, right? There are alerts that fire all around in the system. Now, if you imagine a simple transaction, right, which is going through tiers and tiers of microservices APIs, issue in any one of the APIs is going to cause a cascading effect through the upstream chain, right? And it'll trigger alerts all across your APIs. Now, how do you deal with that? So what we built inside of APM is called as a feature called assisted triage. Assisted triage essentially automates what a human operator would do to identify a problem, right? So how do first you characterize the problem. A problem essentially has an end user impact, right? So APM will automatically create a problem. And then once you have a problem, so here, I see what the problem is, what are the duration looks like. This has been going around for some time. What are the transactions that are impacted by that problem? And as I drill down to get details of that problem, and as I scroll down, here are all the events, right? So APM takes all the performance events that were generated as a part of the transaction and summarizes them. It will collapse them into a problem. So you don't have to go through thousands of alerts, right? So if you didn't have event correlation, you would go through thousands of alerts and try to correlate an alert to a problem, right? So we do this, APM does it automatically for you. I can go and look at these problems. So it looks like, of course, there's an application response time issue because we triggered it in our demo environment. I can look at, each of these alerts, and APM is also telling me, right, what is the possible culprit, right? So that's the probable root cause. So we've identified a problem, we characterized the problem, we also looked at all the events that are part of the problem, and we're also looking at now what the probable root cause is, right? So this is, how we're automating that human operator. And in this case, it looks like, this is a two-process application. Let me show you how the application looks like. Here is the topology of the app. There is essentially a Tomcat process running in one container, making a call out to another process, which is a SPL Liberty-based process, right? And I can look at the topology. This topology is automatically drawn out for me. You don't have to go and configure anything to get this topology. And as you notice, you can see what are the different layers that are running this application, right? So I can look at the container. So I see that there are containers involved here. And I can also see what is the application or transactional visibility inside the containers, right? So what's happening inside the containers in the application layer, right? So there's a servlet call, and it's making there are a couple of calls that are going out to the web services. There's also a JMS call going to another process. And I can see, in this case, in the previous view we saw, APM identified the JMS subsystem to be a bottleneck. I can go and take a look at what the application metrics are here. So for example, if I go down here, these are all my application performance metrics for what is happening inside the container. I can, in the same view, also go and switch my, oops, I didn't want to do that. I quickly switch to the Docker view, and I'm getting now performance metrics from an infrastructure layer, right? And we're constantly enhancing this view. In this view, right now you see application performance events. In future, we're working on getting infrastructure events in this assisted triage pane. So you'll see container health metrics, CPU utilization, heap utilization, right? Some of the host performance. So with that, let me just quickly summarize what we just saw. So the three main things, right, when it comes to a monitoring tool like APM, right, you always start with the end user experience, because it's always important when you're monitoring performance of an app to see what the end user impact is. And then second is to get end-to-end correlation of your transactions. Your transactions are going through many systems, right? They're going through networks, they're going through data centers, they're even hitting mainframe, right, in some cases. So it's extremely important to get end-to-end visibility into your transactions, regardless of what technology you're using for your app, right? You could be using Node.js, Java, you could be running this on Kubernetes, Docker Swarm. And then finally, right, with an APM in place, it is going to generate tons of metrics. There are going to be a lot of performance events that are generated and data that is generated. What do you do with that data, right? So a feature like assisted triage that you just saw is essentially us taking the data, harvesting the data to produce, to characterize problems, and also giving you a faster root cause analysis, so you can remediate the problem faster. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mark.
Okay, thanks. So just in a wrap up, no Game of Thrones reference would be complete without our battle cry, right? So if you're facing internal and external power struggles and maybe communication collaboration issues, choose a tool that's both dev and ops, not dev or ops. So opinions matter, right? Others have successfully battled the White Walkers with Dragon Glass. So why not leverage what they've already learned and put that to work for you so that you're focusing on the core aspects of your business and not building something else that somebody, then leveraging other people's learnings. And finally, watch the forest and the trees, right, to help ensure your victory. So we talked about Yippee.io today, CubeShip.io, and APM. And finally, come and visit us at the CA Technologies booth. We have a raffle, we mentioned that earlier today, giving away a BB-8, an Echo, and a VR kit, I think. And then see some demos. So we'd be happy to show you any of these demos in more depth, talk more about challenges that you're having with Docker, and see if they may help, and score some goods. Of course, we got t-shirts like everybody else. In addition to that, CubeShip is going open source. So go visit cubeship.io/open source and become a member of the community. Help us build CubeShip. Fork, collaborate, and communicate with us on CubeShip. So that's all we have for you today. Thanks for coming. Any questions?